Hello, today I'm going to be presenting my paper, Should Aging Be Viewed as a Disease? So the main aim of my paper is to critically examine whether or not aging should be viewed as a biological disease or if it's merely a stage of life in which we all must go through. In particular, I will be discussing the body and how it is affected by the aging process. So some subsidiary aims of my paper is to understand what it means to age, why it is important in the grand scheme of things, and to advocate for my position on whether or not I believe aging and disease should be viewed in the same light. A second aim that I have is to examine the biological effects aging has on the body and if it should determine how quickly we age. And finally, to determine whether or not disease can cause us to authentically age and how the idea of authentic aging plays into aging just simply being a part of life. So due to the fact that this was a draft, some of the points that are made in this PowerPoint might be left out of the final paper. I'm still polishing the paper, and I hope to write a paper that really makes sense. I kind of noticed while I was developing this PowerPoint that the paper that I developed as a whole to kind of work towards the final paper didn't make sense. So I'm hoping to definitely polish that up a bit. So to begin, what does it mean to age? So due to the ambiguity of the term, there are several meanings of what it means to age. So for the purposes of my paper, I logged on to Merriam-Webster's.com, and the definition that I found that I liked the most was an advanced stage of life. This particular definition makes the most sense because when discussing aging and disease, we're usually referring to somebody in a later stage of life. So when we're discussing somebody with Alzheimer's, we're typically discussing somebody who is of the age of 65 and not necessarily discussing the healthy 24-year-old college student. Alright, so should aging and disease be seen in two different lights? The simple answer to this question that I presented in my paper is yes. And I said this because everything that occurs in our body due to our biological makeup comes as a result that our cells are continuously breaking down and rehabilitating themselves. So aging is a process that can make this slow down or speed up, but it's not the overall factor as to why it happens. So because I've discussed Alzheimer's a little bit, I wanted to include a picture of a healthy brain versus a brain with Alzheimer's. So as we can see on the left, we have a full, big, healthy brain, and on the right, we have the Alzheimer's brain that has definitely shrunk, and we can see the plaques at the end that kind of make this a very unhealthy brain. So it should be noted that this happened to the brain because of the disease and not because the person was 65, because somebody could be 65 and have a brain that very much so looks like the one on the left. So some opposition to my claim is that it can be argued that aging and disease could be related because we often see a connection between the two. So for example, if one develops dementia or Alzheimer's, this happens later in life. So we would be inclined to believe that that aging is what caused this and not just the fact that it was a disease that could have been seen in our biological makeup. So this disease actually causes the aging process to be sped up or slowed down. So to kind of further bring this point, in the example like the one above, we see the correlation between the two, aging and disease, but it should be mentioned that faster aging would occur because of the disease and not necessarily because the person is getting older. So I kind of wanted to include a quote by somebody who believed that aging and disease should not be seen in the same light. So I included this quote by Maggie Kuhn, who was an advocate of I think she actually founded the Grey Panthers movement, which was basically something that advocated for older folks and now being old is not a disease and that they are still quite capable of what they were able to do in their prime. So she said, old age is not a disease. It is a strength and survivorship. Triumph over all kinds of vicissitudes and disappointments, trials, and illnesses. So, we're now going to move into my third subsidiary aim, and that is the role that disease has on authentic aging. So, under the idea of authentic aging, we are seeing a life that is not established ahead of time. It is not a life of abstraction, but a life well lived. Authentic aging is an argument that promotes the separation of disease and aging, and it also shows that one does not determine the other. Okay, so to break this down a little bit and to explain it a little further, it connects into my paper because one of the main aims was to discuss whether or not aging is merely a stage of life in which we all must go through. And I think authentic aging really highlights this because it kind of shows that what we go through and what is being determined by aging is based off of how we live our life. It's not necessarily something that could be determined by something that could have been in our biological makeup. So, I'm now going to discuss why authentic aging is important. So, authentic aging could cause one to age slower. So, some of the most important factors in aging include stress and poor diet. So, if we begin living our lives in a way that is less harmful to our bodies, we might actually slow down the aging process. So, due to the information above, it can be seen that as we age, we are merely working our way through life. This is not something a disease can determine. So aging, obviously, unless we're Benjamin Buttons, we are going to get older each and every day. This is not something that's going to be reversed, and it's not anything that can be stopped. However, we ourselves are capable of slowing down the process and making sure that our bodies are as healthy as they can be as we move through aging itself. When a disease comes along, this really isn't a part of authentic aging. This is just also an included factor that might cause us to age faster. However, there's not a single doctor in the world that would probably just give us, just say, oh, you're just old. You know what I mean? Okay, so one opposition to the idea of authentic aging is successful aging. So the idea behind successful aging is that once we develop a life-altering disease, we are no longer successfully aging. This brings in the idea that aging and disease are connected. And this idea contradicts authentic aging because the disease determines how well a life has been lived. So in this case, when we develop a disease, we're no longer able to age well. And I don't really feel like that is something that should be seen in the same light because one could develop something, say as cancer, and still go out and live their best lives. A disease is just something that comes as a result of maybe something we've done to develop the disease, or maybe even a biological makeup, a predetermined idea that we were going to acquire the disease at the end of life. Alright, finally, I have some open questions. Are there any proving factors that show aging is a disease? So is there any background out there that could maybe prove to me that aging is a disease? The second question I have is, if aging is not a disease, then should we care less about our bodies as we age? So should we kind of start letting ourselves go as we get older because, hey, we're getting older anyway? And finally, does authentically aging really slow down the aging process? So the less stress we have, or the more we take care of ourselves, can this slow down how quickly we age? Or how we age, rather. Alright, and finally I have my work cited, and I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down and watch my presentation, and I hope it gave you a little bit of insight into what my final paper is going to be about. Thank you.